Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. Today, we are going to discuss the Sumo Logic Kubernetes solution. So before we get started with the meeting today, I would like to do a quick round of introductions. My name is Suresh Govindachetty. I work as a solutions engineer with Sumo Logic. And along with me, I have Eddie Thompson, who is a senior solutions engineer. Eddie would be addressing any questions, any comments that you have with respect to our Sumo Logic Kubernetes solution today. So there is a Q&A button which is there in the webinar. So you can click that and then you can post your questions and then Eddie would be answering it. Feel free to ask any questions, any comments that you have on the queries box below. And we will try to answer all your queries to the best of our knowledge. At the end of the webinar, we'll be sending you the recording of this webinar as well. So let us get started. Today, we are going to see who is Sumo Logic, and we are going to look at the Sumo Logic Kubernetes solution overview. And post it, we will see data collection mechanisms. Post the data collection, we'll be discussing about the app catalog, how we can build your own content using content building, and a couple of enablement options that we have within Sumo Logic. And we'll be taking a deeper investigation into the K8s blog. And provided we have time, we will be having a separate Q&A session as well. But don't wait for the Q&A session as it. So you can start posting your questions on the Q&A, and then we will keep answering it as we progress with respect to the demo. So who are we? Who is Sumo Logic? So we are the industry's first and only continuous intelligence platform. So we are a machine data analytics platform. So we started in 2010, and then now we are around a 10-year-old company. So what do we do as a service? So we ingest machine data, which is in the form of logs, in the form of metrics, in the form of events, in the form of security related logs, events. So we ingest them into Sumo Logic, and then we process all this data, and then we derive meaningful insights so that you can make business decisions out of it. So we process data at a petabyte scale. So we are a SaaS platform available as a service. So we are hosted out of AWS, and we have multiple regions of where you can opt Sumo Logic as a service. So the multiple regions presence provides you an option with respect to where you want to keep your data, which helps you from your GDPR as well as from the compliance perspective. So let's look into the topic of the day today. So we are going to talk about the Sumo Logic K8s solution. So before we get on to the Kubernetes solution, let us look at what challenges that we have when it comes to monitoring, managing, and then securing the Kubernetes clusters. So the first thing that comes when we talk about Kubernetes is that there are many number of things to monitor. So we have a master node, we have nodes, we have a lot of clusters which are over there. So we have various different deployments. There are namespaces. We have a lot of nodes which are spread across. So we are talking about the building blocks, containers, pods, nodes, services, a lot of components which needs to be monitored and then managed. And also all these components that we are talking about, these are very ephemeral. So we have pods which exist for a few seconds, and then once the work of the pod is done, it is gone. So we are talking about infrastructure where things are very ephemeral, where things keep constantly changing within the cluster. So which means that when you do a monitoring of it, you must be able to represent the exact state of your cluster. Also, the workflow is spread across many different tools. So when you have solutions to monitor your Kubernetes, there can be occasions where the traditional monitoring tools are not built to show you the complete correlation between all the different components that you have within the cluster. So the DevOps engineer typically flows between or jumps between multiple tools. He may be looking at multiple different data sets. So the workflow is spread across, which basically requires that the DevOps engineer or the engineer has to manually visualize or he has to build a mental map of the cluster by themselves. So this is where most of the tools have issues. So the tools are built with infrastructure visibility focus, whereas Kubernetes is a different technology altogether. They basically lack correlation because the data sets are different. You need a proper mechanism by which you can consistently tag all the data, and then you can correlate, and then you can visualize them. And fragmented visibility results in the engineers logging into multiple different tools, jumping onto different solutions altogether. Thereby, the mental map is completely lost, or people have to build their visibility of the cluster themselves. And this is where Sumo Logic solution comes in place. So using Sumo Logic Kubernetes monitoring solution, you can confidently monitor your cluster, you can troubleshoot your cluster, and then you can secure your environment as well. So let's get on to the Sumo Logic interface now. So what I have here is Explorer-based view. So the name, as it says, you can explore your cluster by using this Explorer view. So you can see here that I have a menu option on the left-hand side, and depending on what I choose here, so you can see different options depending on the data that I would like to visualize. So here we have various different hierarchies within the Kubernetes cluster. So when it comes to Kubernetes, most of us are familiar with the various hierarchies which are available within the cluster. So we are talking about things like various different deployments which are available within the cluster. We are talking about various different namespaces and things like that. So here on the left-hand side, I can explore the Kubernetes cluster by going onto this explore view. For this discussion today, I have one cluster here, which is a prod 01 travellogic.info. This is a demo cluster. And if you have multiple clusters, then you can see all of the clusters over here. And on the top, I have an explorer where I can choose different views here. So here I can see there is a deployment view here. There is a node view. There is a namespace view. There is a service view. So these are the 4 different views that we have. Depending upon what we want to see here. So I can choose any one of these particular views. So say, for example, let me start with something like a node-based view, right? So I'm getting onto a node view here. And now I can see that the cluster is actually going to populate with the node-based view. So I have the demo cluster here. And once you open the demo cluster, I can see there are multiple different nodes being shown here, right? So I can go ahead and take a look at any one of these particular nodes. So I'm going to choose, say, for example, the first node that we see here. The moment I choose this node, then I can see that the details about the node populating on the right-hand side of it. So I can see a lot of metrics which is shown about this particular node. So I can look at my CPU utilization, the memory utilizations, the number of nodes, the CPU related statistics. You can see tons of metrics which are shown here, which will help you to understand the health of this particular node. So in case you are looking out to find out if there is any issues with respect to this node, I would say that this node view is actually helpful to troubleshoot your issue, right? So you can go through this node view, and then inside the node, I can see the various different pods over here. So I can decide to choose and then see any one of the spots over here. Say, for example, I choose one of the spots, and then I can see all the details about the spots being shown up over here. So here you can see the pod is actually showing up in green. A lot of metrics which shows the health of the spot, and looks like everything is good and healthy with respect to this particular node. Having seen the node view, now we can move on to the other views available within the cluster. So here I can choose, say, for example, a namespace view. Right? So this shows the various namespaces available within my cluster. So here I can see that there is a cluster overview over here. which shows metrics like my average CPU utilization, memory utilization, the total CPUs, the memory which is available, etc. And below this, I can see the errors by the namespace. So this shows there are a couple of namespaces which are facing errors, like the Sumo Logic namespace is having some errors. There's a prod login which is facing errors, etc. And on the right side, I can see there are the security rules triggered. So there are a lot of rules which are actually showing up that there are rules which are matching the Falco, which is actually getting triggered over here, right? And if I come down a little bit, I can see the various pods running under the various different namespaces like my Cube system, Sumo Logic, Progen, etc. And then I see that there are a couple of pods actually which are showing up in red over here, right? And if I come down a bit, I can see the namespace stats. I can see tons of metrics, which is actually helpful with respect to understanding the health of my cluster as well as for the monitoring and troubleshooting part of it. So now that I see there are a couple of errors in my namespace, I am going to my Explorer and I'm going to open up my Sumo Logic, my Progen, the namespace over here. So this brings in my Progen namespace. Now I'm seeing the data with respect to my project. Now I see that there are 7 pods running over here, and it shows that there are a couple of pods which have actually failed. And I see there are totally 7 pods over here, and there are some errors which are reported by the pod. And this error seems to be coming from the PagerDuty pod. And if we see down over here, this shows all the pods running in my deployment. And I see that there are 2 pods which are showing up in red. So I see there is a carbon block pod which is actually showing up in red, and then the PagerDuty. But then the error logs are showing only the PagerDuty over here, right? So given this scenario, we are going to see how we can troubleshoot this particular issue that we are seeing over here for this particular 2 pods. So to get to more details about this pod, I am going to go to my Progen namespace. And then I'm going to open up my carbon block pad, which is actually showing up in red over here. So now the cluster is actually showing me the details about my carbon black pod. So here I can visualize the carbon block pod. So this shows me like there is a 1 pod which is actually showing up in red over here, and I see there are restarts. In fact, a couple of restarts which I see over here. And then if you come down a little bit, I can look at the CPU limits, etc. And then there is a pod state over here. And I look at the pod state. The pod state shows us it is in a crash loop backup state. And if we look at the status closer, it shows me that there is a pod which is like the pod is actually trying to come up. It shows up in the green, but then it basically gets killed, which showing reason as the OOM getting killed. So if we come down a little bit, I can see things like the percentage memory limit, memory used, etc. But then I also see the panel here, which is memory usage versus limits versus requests. So this is an important panel which shows that the current utilization of the memory, right? So this basically tells us the red line is showing what is the limit over here for the resource utilization. And then we see that the pod is actually exceeding the limit. So this is basically causing the scheduler to go ahead and then kill this particular pod. So if I go ahead and then come down a little bit, it shows me the terminated containers by reason. And if I look at the reason, it says it is out of memory, which is getting killed, right? So by going through the cluster state, by looking at the various different namespaces, and then getting down to the specifics of this namespace, and then getting onto the pods, so we are able to find out why this particular pod is actually facing issues. Now that we know why the pod is actually facing issues, we can go ahead and then we can get this issue resolved. Now let us look at the other views which are available in the Explorer. So we looked at the node view so far, and then the namespace. We also have a deployment view. So when we go on to a deployment view, the cluster shows us under the demo cluster, it shows the various different namespaces. And then under the namespace, it shows the various different deployments which are available. So I can go ahead and then I can take a look at any of these deployments which are available over here. Say, for example, I can look at my FluentD deployment. So this shows me the various pods which are present under this particular deployment. And I can take a look at the various different metrics here, which shows the health of this particular deployment. And I can also jump onto this particular pod over here, which is part of this deployment, to have a closer look here, right? So I can also choose to have a service view as well. So if in case you are a DevOps engineer and then you are responsible for a service, the service is all that you are focused about. So in that case, you can go straight away to a service-based view. So I can expand my demo cluster over here. I can go to any of this particular namespaces. Say, for example, again, go back to my Sumo Logic namespace. So I can go back to my Sumo Logic namespace. Then I can look at various different services under the namespace. So I can choose any one of the services over here. Say, for example, I can look at my fluent bit. So this shows me the fluent bit metrics, the pods which are part of this particular service. I can go through the various different metrics, which shows the health of my service. And then I can get onto any of the specific pods as well, right? So this helps you to navigate through the Explorer, and then you can understand the status of your cluster. You can go through the various different hierarchies, and you can easily find out the dependencies between the various different elements that constitutes either your service or your deployment, and then you can look at a troubleshooting aspects of it. Now that we have seen the various different views, let us quickly get back and then find out how we are able to build all of these particular views. And this is where the data collection architecture of Sumo Logic comes into play. So as part of our data collection, we collect the logs, we collect events, metrics, and then the security related events. And for collecting all of this information, we use the open source based collection mechanism. So we use Fluent Bit Collector for collecting the logs. So we run this as a daemon set across all the nodes in the cluster. The Fluent Bit basically picks up all the logs and then it sends it to Sumo Logic. For collecting events, we use Fluentd. So all the Kubernetes events, they come to the API server. So the Fluentd basically looks at the API server and then it picks up all the events and then it sends it to the Sumo Logic service. And for metrics, we use Prometheus. You may be already using Prometheus inside your environment. So Prometheus is a popular tool, and then it is a good tool for things like auto discovery. You can do some custom instrumentation for picking up your data from your applications, etc. But then it has certain limitations when it comes to scalability and then the long-term retention. So as your deployment grows, if you use your own Prometheus, then you will basically end up in creating silos, whereby the process of getting aggregate cross namespace visibility becomes a challenge. Whereas when it comes to Sumo, you can decide to retain data as much as you want. So we provide a variable data retention where you can decide to store your logs and metrics as long as you want. So once we collect all this data, we run the data through a centralized enrichment process. So the traditional tools, when they collect this data, they may be tagging them with the pod, the container, the node. But when it comes to Sumo Logic, we not only tag all the logs, metrics, events, and security with the pod, the container, or the node which it came from. We also consistently tag it from which service it came from, which particular deployment it came from, and then which particular namespace it came from. So all the data is consistently tagged with the enrichment process, and this is the secret sauce behind the Explorer view that we see. So which basically enables us to seamlessly navigate between various different views, whereby you can easily correlate data from your monitoring and then your troubleshooting perspective. So once we collect all this data, we enrich all this data, we send all this data to Sumo Logic. And once data reaches Sumo Logic, the visualization part begins. So for the visualization, we have, we can go to the manage data, we look at collection. So this shows various Sumo Logic collectors and then all the data which is collected as part of the Sumo Logic collection process. Once we collect all this data, then visualization of the data is as simple as you go to an app catalog. So we have around 100 plus apps over here. So these apps are developed by Sumo Logic, supported by Sumo Logic, and these are completely free. And you can see that these apps span across various different categories over here. So we have services from the AWS. So we have extensive set of applications which are built for AWS services. From the compliance and security perspective, you can see tons of apps which are built in, which are readily available to use. We have apps readily usable for databases, DevOps, the GCP platform. We have tools for the IT infrastructure side of it, and we have Kubernetes, the Azure platform, operating systems, storage, and then the web servers. So what is an app? So the app is something very similar to a template. So to get more details about app, all that you have to do is just click this app, and then you can go ahead and then you can preview this dashboards. So the app contains a set of dashboards, queries, alerts, which are built in, which is readily usable by you. So here you can see that we have various different previews which are readily available for CrowdTrail. So you can go through all of this particular dashboards. And once you want to install this particular dashboard, all you have to do is say add to library, and then you have to mention where your CloudTrail logs are. I would say CloudTrail, and then say click add to the library. And this will add the app into your personal folder, and then you can see all of these dashboards with your data inside it. So let me quickly show you some dashboards that I have for CloudTrail with some sample data. So we can look at the CloudTrail overview here. So this shows geolocation of all the users. So the way this particular GeoView is built is that we pick up the IP address, we do external table lookup, we pick up the latitude, longitude, and then we show it as a GeoView. This helps you to graphically visualize the data. So we have things like created resources, deleted resources over time, failed logins, created, deleted network and security events. From the network and then the security perspective, you can see authorization failures, which are happening from various different countries. And you can see like things like created and deleted network and security. You can also see network ACL with all allowed in English/exit. This is definitely a security flaw that someone has to definitely look into. So you can create alerts as well. So when all the ports are actually open when it comes to the ACL side of it. So we have a GeoView over here. This shows authorization failures over time, etc. You can look at console logins. So this dashboard shows where console logins are happening from. Say, for example, this shows logins from outside the USA. Let us see how these dashboards are built in quickly. So I am opening up this particular query over here. And then you can see that we are basically looking at logins happening from outside the United States. So we can change this to India. So we can say any logins happening from outside the India region, then you can see them over here, right? So we can also create an alert because we want to know if any logins happen from outside the country. So all I can do is I can say save as, then I can say logins happening outside India, and I can say schedule the search, and I can decide any frequency that I want to run this particular search to, and then say, for example, I want to run it every hour. Then I can also set up a condition saying that whenever the following condition is met, and that condition is whenever I see results greater than 0, that means there are logins which are happening outside the country, and then I would like to get alerted. So the alert can be through email. So all the email recipients will receive an alert. So we also support a ServiceNow connection where we can automatically create a ticket in ServiceNow. And we also have webhooks through which we can create a ticket in any app that supports webhooks. So Slack is one of the very popular channels where we can create an alert, PagerDuty, etc. So by getting alerts, you can become proactive rather than being completely reactive when it comes to monitoring and then troubleshooting your infrastructure. So now that we have seen, let us get back to our Kubernetes cluster. So I can open up panel over here. I'm going into my log search. Then I can look out for, say, for example, my cluster. So I'm looking at my demo cluster over here for the last 15 minutes. So this gives me the So this gives me the logs for the last 15 minutes. Okay, so zero one dot travel logic dot info. So this gives me all my logs for the last 15 minutes for my entire cluster. And here I can see the log structure over here, a lot of JSON, all type of logs, the error logs, info logs. I can see all type of logs over here. So what I can do here is that I can go ahead and then I can look at my level name over here. So I'm going to choose this particular field and I'm going to pass this, and I want to extract all the levels over here. So I'm going to do my levels, and I will run my query now. So this gives me my levels. So with Sumo Logic, you can parse on the fly. So which means you can send all your log data to Sumo Logic, and then you can parse it, and then you can extract all the fields out, and then you can build all your querying, and then you can do all your analysis. So this is a big differentiator where you don't have to predefine the fields and send all the data to Sumo. You can send all the logs to Sumo Logic, and then you can parse, and then you can build all your analytics over it. So here I am going to say where my level matches, say for example, error. This takes out all my error logs, and then I'm going to basically count them. Every 1 minute. So this basically creates a time slice of every 1 minute, and then I'm going to say that now I can see the errors by different time slices. So I can get it as a line graph and visualize as a bar. So I can decide to see how I want to see this data. And then I can add this to my dashboard over here. So I can say errors by time. Then I can create my first dashboard. Create my dashboard over here. I'm just going to choose this beta stuff. So I can add this as my dashboard. Now this is creating my dashboard over here. So I am creating my own dashboard. I don't have to only look at the pre-built dashboards over here. So I can build any of the dashboards that I want. So once I create this dashboard, so now I can add more data to here. There are a lot of options by which you can create your own panels, various different panels. So once we create this dashboard, I'm going to go here, create a stack linking. I'm going to say that my cluster, which is prod 01 dot travel logic dot info. So now I'm linking this dashboard to my cluster. So now I go ahead and then I can going to launch my Explorer view again. And once I launch my Explorer view, I can go to the cluster overview, and then I can scroll down, and then I can see that my first dashboard is actually built, and then it is readily available over here. Right, so I can see that the errors by time is there. So I can go ahead and then I can view my dashboard. Give me a minute. Yeah. So this is the dashboard that we have built in, and then we can add it to the part of the stack. So you can create your own dashboards, and then you can link it to the Explorer view as well. Okay, so now let's get back to our cluster again. So I'm going to go back to my namespace view here. So I'm actually looking at my cluster. So I can go ahead and then I can look at my cluster overview, which shows me the overview about my cluster. And I also have an option to go ahead and see various other dashboards as well over here. So I can look at my cluster explorer over here, which shows me the nodes, the relative CPU usage by pod, so pod memory details, the CPU pod details by node. So you can see all of them. I can also go into my security overview dashboard here. So with Sumo Logic, we have integration with Falco. So the Falco is a open source based tool. So there are a lot of tools which are available in the market today. So using these tools, you can basically look at things like any violations which are happening, you can basically get the container level security visibility. The tools available in the market today, they provide insight into things like, say, for example, if there are any anomalous activities which are happening over there, it collects security events, and then they provide visibility into compliance and then the audit related events. With our data collection mechanism, so we are providing Falco, which is an open source based tool. The Falco basically detects anomalous activity and then the security events. So once we deploy Falco as part of our data collection mechanism, the Falco uses the kernel modules. It looks into the user space libraries, the K tests, audit events, etc. And it watches for any security events that match the Falco rule file. And once it sees there is a match with any of the rules, the Falco basically creates a notification, and these notifications are collected as part of the data collection mechanism. The Fluent bit collects those data and then sends it to Sumo Logic. So for installing the Sumo Logic data collection mechanism, all that you need is a single Helm command. So by running a single Helm command which says Helm install Sumo Logic, you provide the access ID key. We will install all those components, the Fluent bit, Fluentd, Prometheus, and Falco as part of our data collection mechanism. And then we gather all this data, we do the enrichment, and then we send it to Sumo Logic. So once we get back to our cluster here, I'm looking at my security overview for Falco. So this shows various different security related violations, alerts which are happening within your cluster. So things like the events based on various different priorities are shown over here. You can see the total events, emergency alerts, errors, critical alerts, etc. It also shows the top 10 rules which are getting triggered. The dashboard also shows things like the rules triggered by the user, the rules triggered by priority, how many are warning which requires immediate attention, how many are info, etc. It also shows rules triggered by process, then the rules triggered by prod, etc. Similarly, we can go into the security rules trigger. So this shows the various different rules within the Falco, and then which are the rules which are getting triggered over here. So you can see the detailed view when it comes to monitoring your Kubernetes cluster from the security perspective. So having seen that, I would like to get back to our Explorer view. So we can get back to the cluster overview over here, right? Look at the app catalog. So we can go back to our Kubernetes over here. So here we can see the Kubernetes dashboards which are there, which we are able to visualize through the Explorer. We also have an app for control plane. If you have your own Kubernetes, then you can visualize all your control plane with the Explorer view. So you can see the control plane elements over here. So you can see the API server, the scheduler, the etcd, the control manager, etc. And you can go back to the app catalog here. We can also see we also have apps which are built for the cluster security. So we have StackRox here, we have Twistlog, we have JFrog X-Ray, we are looking at Aqua Security. So these are the tools that we have tested and then we have integrated with Sumo Logic. So you can bring all these tools as well to Sumo, and then you can get the same cross-correlated views that we see with respect to the Explorer. And if you have a hosted environment, then you can see the apps here. We have the Amazon EKS control plane here, the AKS, and then the GKE, which helps you to visualize the control plane when it comes to the hosted environments. Let us look at the service view now. So these are the apps that we have. So this helps you to monitor your cluster when it comes to the compliance violations, your images, the registry. So you can look at all of them with these various different tools. So we also have a service view when it comes to the Explorer. So the service view helps you to visualize data from your service perspective. The traditional tools when used, they are complex, they are slow, and then it is difficult to find troubleshoot issues. The engineer or the DevOps engineer has to visualize the cluster themselves. The pods will be spread across various different nodes. So people have to create a mental map of the service by themselves. So this is disconnected from the customer reality. But when it comes to Sumo Logic, we provide you a service-centric point of view where all the data related to the services are segregated, and then it is quick, simple to understand. So the team can quickly go through and then find out issues, and they can easily navigate, and then they can correlate logs, they can correlate metrics, they can correlate security, which is what is required when you want to monitor a Kubernetes based cluster. So let's get on to the service view over here. So I have the Explorer, so I can go back to the service view, and I can go to my nodes. I can choose services, say for example, my broad log gen. I can look at any one of my service over here, right? So using Sumo Logic, you can navigate between various different views, and you can do the observability of your cluster, wherein we can collect data from your clusters. We can do the discoverability, where you can navigate your cluster. You can go through various different views depending upon what you want to visualize inside your cluster. And we integrate security with your Kubernetes monitoring. So using Sumo Logic, you can constantly monitor, you can secure your cluster, and then you can do troubleshooting. So I will quickly show you how we can troubleshoot the second scenario that we visualized with the Explorer. So let's quickly get back to the namespace view here. So we earlier saw that we had a prod login, we had errors. So I'm going back to the errors here. So I see that there are two pods. One, we looked at the carbon back pod, and then now we have the PagerDuty pod. So let us quickly look at the PagerDuty pod over here. So I'm going into my PagerDuty pod. I can see that it is looking very similar to the scenario we saw earlier, where I have a pod which is actually crashing with a couple of thousands of restarts over here. And if we come back to the pod state says crash loop backup, right? So, and if I look at this, it says the reason as an error. And this looks different than the scenario that we saw earlier. So I'm coming down a bit, I'm looking at the memory and all of the stuff. And then now if I see here the memory usage, limits, checkers, this seems to be all good. But then there doesn't seem to be any problem with respect to the resource utilization limits over here, right? So what I'm going to do over here is that I want to go ahead and then I want to see all my logs within this particular pod to see what is causing this particular application to have an issue. So I'm opening up all my logs over here, and here I can see that the system has automatically picked up my namespace, the cluster where the logs needs to come from, the particular deployment, and then the particular pod that I'm looking at. And if I come down to the logs and then look at it, I can see that Java IO exception, unable to determine collector API, the URL status code shows 401. So there seems to be some authentication issue over here. It shows the status code 401. If I come down a little bit, you can see some logs over here, and I see as access key, okay? And I see there is an access ID over here. So I'm going to copy this access ID. And I'm going to go to my cluster. I'm going to look out for the access ID, and I'm going to choose last 60 minutes and then see what is happening with respect to my pod. So now the system is searching across my instance and then looking for this particular key that we are looking at. Now there are a couple of results over here. I can go through all of them, but I can also go ahead and then do a log reduce. So log reduce is a technology from Sumo Logic, which uses advanced pattern finding algorithms, fuzzy logic, and basically log reduce goes through logs and then it is going to group them by related patterns and signatures. So here the number of logs are less 24, but in your environment it can be thousands of logs. Log reduce will quickly go through them and then it will show you, or it will group all the logs by related patterns and signatures. And here I can see that the couple of logs here, and then it shows I can open up these logs, which are grouped together as two logs together. And I can see that there is a SOC who has actually successfully deleted the access key for this particular user. So this is the reason why the particular pod is actually facing issues. So we saw two scenarios over here with the Explorer. So we looked at how we can navigate across the cluster using various different views. So we had two pods which are actually facing issues. And then we looked at two scenarios where we looked at one scenario where we were able to troubleshoot and resolve the issue by going through the metrics. And then we had another pod which faces issues. And then we were able to go through the logs of this particular pod. And then we were able to resolve the particular issue. So using Sumo Logic, you can confidently monitor, you can secure, and then you can troubleshoot your Kubernetes clusters. So you can try out Sumo Logic by opting for a trial. So we provide a free trial. So you can go to this particular URL. We provide a 30-day free trial, and then you can try Sumo Logic in your environment. And feel free to reach back to us in case you face any issues, and then we are happy to work with you to make sure that you are able to get value out of the Sumo Logic Kubernetes platform. We also have a public channel, our Sumo Logic Dojo. So you can join this public channel to continue our conversations. So we have various of our solution engineers, the customers who are over there, and then this is a channel where you can discuss, you can raise your queries, and then you can have productive discussions over here. Right, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover as part of the Kubernetes, Sumo Logic Kubernetes solution. We have some more time left, so if you have queries, please go ahead and then you can put it on the Q&A, and then we can try to answer them. Eddie, are there any questions that we need to answer? Okay, so there is a question here. Can we demo an alert? Okay, so let's do that. So can get back to Sumo over here. So we have a query which we can build quickly, and then we can demo it. So let me do the query over here. So let us look at, say, for example, the logins happening outside the USA. So we did run through a demo over here. So, but then we can take any one of these queries here. So I can quickly show you a query which I readily have. So say, for example, I can use the Apache access logs. I can parse and then extract the various different status codes out of it. So I can extract the status codes by going through the messages. So the system extracts the various different status codes over here. And once I extract the status codes, I can go ahead and I can look at a time slice, and I can count by the time slice. So this shows the various different status codes which are happening by various different time slices. So I can see the 403 is happening here, 302s, 404s, 401s, etc. But this is not easier to visualize. So what I can do here is that I can go ahead and then I can transpose my data, and this gives me the various time slices, and then what are the status codes over the different time slice. So I can do a save as, then I can say time slice status codes. status code by time, and I can say schedule this, and I can say every 15 minutes, I can use a different time frame, and then I can choose every time a search is complete, I can ask the system to send an alert, or I can set up specific conditions as well, saying that whenever 200 status code is more than, say for example, 40 or something like that, I can set up a condition, and then I can also trigger an alert. So right now I can say that every time the search is complete, send me an alert, and that alert can be through an email. So the alerts can be sent, all the email recipients will receive an alert. We have a ServiceNow connection through which we can readily create a ticket in a ServiceNow. We also support webhooks through which we can create alerting in, say for example, your Slack, your PagerDuty, etc. So if that's the questions, then um, we have come to the end of the webinar. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar. We will send across a recording to you. Thank you all and have a great day.